Okay, welcome everybody. I'm Susan Macbeth, the founder and owner of Adventures by the Book, and I'm excited today to announce our Reading Between the Vines series of book and wine pairings. And today we're featuring this beauty, The Women of Chateau Lafayette by New York Times bestselling author Stephanie Dray, and featuring the wine pairing presented by Emily of Chateau Lafayette Reneau. And yes, it is a day of Chateau Lafayette. We're so excited that we have a woman-owned winery, but a Chateau Lafayette winery is just so perfect. So for over 35 years, since 1985, Chateau Lafayette Reneau has produced estate-grown vinifera wines. Their 110-acre family-owned and operated estate is in New York's Finger Lakes and provides the optimal sun exposure and airflow necessary to produce you think I'd been drinking wine all afternoon, aromatic white wines and rich full-bodied red wines. And Emily is here today to tell us more about the wines they selected today to pair with the Women of Chateau Lafayette. Welcome, Emily.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that awesome introduction. My name is Emily Marcellus. I am the general manager at Chateau Lafayette Reneau. I do want to just share the owner, Samira, had planned to be here tonight, but her children are sick, so she really had to focus on them for the evening. So I apologize for her absence, but I'm happy to be here with you regardless. When we were approached to partner with Stephanie and with Susan, we were trying to find a creative way that we could incorporate wines from Chateau Lafayette Reneau and with the book. And we thought, why not do a pairing and a trio, since there's 3 women and we could choose 3 wines. And to be honest, at first, I wasn't sure how we would do this. I've never paired wines with a book before, but this was honestly one of the most fun experiences I've ever had. To share this experience with our staff, to discuss the book, to choose the wines. It's really been just special. And I'm very grateful to have had this opportunity. I pretty much made my pairings within the first 100 pages of the book. And then as I kept reading, my choices were only affirmed. And it's just been phenomenal. So I will get into it now. We have chosen 3 wines, a Chardonnay, a Pinot Noir, and a Merlot. I'll start with our Chardonnay. It's our 2019 Proprietor's Reserve Chardonnay, which is made from 100% Chardonnay grapes. And it is aged in French oak, which gives it a really light, mild oak characteristic to it. I chose this wine to pair with Adrienne, as on more than one occasion in the book, she comments about drinking champagne. Now, this is not a champagne, but Chardonnay comes from the Champagne region and is one of the main grapes always used to produce a traditional champagne. So I've just made the connection there between Adrienne's love of a lovely glass of iced champagne and our Proprietor's Reserve Chardonnay, which is made with French oak. This is a very approachable Chardonnay and has really beautiful crisp fruit characteristics and a lovely mouthfeel that I'm sure all of you will enjoy. Moving on. So my next pairing, I chose a Pinot Noir for Martha. We'll finish with Beatrice. I really clicked with Martha's journey. I felt that she had a lot of internal and external struggles. We see her progress forward. We see her take steps backwards. We follow her spirit through its delicate highs and lows, and we feel those emotions as well. And that reminded me of Pinot Noir, which is a notoriously finicky grape to grow. As you go through the harvest season, there is no promise that a Pinot Noir will produce a wonderful end result. And it takes a lot of effort and a lot of time and a lot of attention. And as I mentioned, it is delicate from day one until the day that you actually harvest. And that really reminded me of Martha and her spirit and her delicateness as she went through her challenges to get to where she ended up. So for that, I chose our beautiful 2019 Pinot Noir. It's made from 100% Pinot Noir grapes as well. It's a light to medium bodied red wine with some beautiful fruit characteristics, and I know that you will enjoy it. And finally, we have our 2017 Merlot. Merlot is paired with Beatrice. Merlot is a very traditional French red grape. It is known for being versatile, for blending into other wines. You can produce it as a wine on its own, and it is very popular in this world. As I was reading about Beatrice, some of these buzzwords popped into my head when I was trying to think about wine. Versatile, blending, popular, and I couldn't think of a better wine to pair with Beatrice and her energy. This is a bold red wine, little bit spicy, has some juicy red fruit characteristics, and even when I describe the wine, I think of Beatrice and her heart. So those are our 3 wine pairings. I want you all to know that if you missed the opportunity to order the trio before this event, we are going to leave the trio up on our website in our online store while supplies last. You're welcome to order anytime through our store or over the phone. And our website is www.clrwine.com. In addition to ordering the trio, we hope that you all will find the opportunity to visit us in the heart of the Finger Lakes at Chateau Lafayette Reneau.
Oh my God, what an amazing pairing, what an amazing presentation. I'm getting like a little misty here because you like totally got them. And now I want to drink this wine so badly.
Yes.
I don't know if you had to drink them in order, what order do you drink them in?
So I presented them in the order that you would drink. So you would probably start with the Chardonnay and then move to the Pinot Noir and then to the Merlot. And please know that you don't have to drink all 3 bottles in one sitting, you know, and the fun thing about pairing wine traditionally with food is there are some rules, but it's also subjective and it's up to the individual to what they enjoy. So my pairings for these women and that I'm suggesting here are not going to be the same that you experience when you try these wines and read the book. So that's the fun of pairing wine with literature, is it will be different for everyone.
Absolutely. And you had one of the bottles with you? Which one?
Yes.
Which one did you have?
So I have our Merlot here. This is my current favorite. It's the wine that I paired with Beatrice. Really, really bold, very representative of a beautiful red wine in the Finger Lakes. Highly suggest you all grab your trio and try it.
Okay, while you're holding that up, Stephanie,
Yeah.
can you put Beatrice's hat back on so we can get a photo, a screenshot
Well,
of the wine?
I'm going to try this for Beatrice's hat this time.
Yes.
Oh,
She
okay.
wore one quite like it.
I like it. That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Emily. That was a great pairing. And we put the link up. Thank you, Debbie, for doing that in the chat box. For those of you who haven't had a chance to order the wine, it comes in a 3-pack. And I feel like you have to drink all 3 wines and do like you know what you need to do? You need to invite your book club. Okay, this is what we're doing. You're going to invite your book club. You're going to have all 3 bottles of wine. You guys can bring hats if you want. I'm just saying. Then you can book Stephanie. Did you know that Stephanie is a Novel Network author? And what that means is she is available to chat with book clubs. So you go to novelnetwork.com, check out Stephanie Dray, read about her calendar's on the site. You can visit, then you can order your wine and you can meet with Stephanie, with your book club while you're drinking wine, wearing your hats. I mean, this could be the most amazing book club experience ever, right?
Oh yeah. In fact, I am now going to be revising all of my book club materials so that we include this wine pairing and where to buy these wines because this is great. And I don't know if Emily knows this, but I grew up in upstate New York. And
I didn't.
Yeah. So I used to go to the Finger Lakes because my grandmother loved to play the ponies and there is a racetrack there. So we would drive by all the wine, which I was much too young to drink. But sometimes she would stop off with her girlfriends and they would have a little sample. And now I'm thinking I'm getting to the age where I might like to do that too. So I think I should make a visit at some point.
Please do.
I would love to. And I really want to know why is your winery named after Lafayette?
So the The original owners who opened it in 1985 were a husband and wife duo, and Lafayette and Reneau were different names in their family heritage. So as a husband and wife duo, they put them together. Yeah.
Is there a relation, or is it just a coincidence?
I don't know. Another thing that you may, I mean, Lafayette's a really popular name in the US. There's towns named Lafayette everywhere, including here. So I don't know if they were immediately related, or if it's just a name that they're not immediately related, obviously, or just a name that their family kind of had over time. I'm not sure.
Well, we're gonna have to find out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you, Emily. And Carla says, this has taken book clubs to a whole new level. Yes, it has, Carla. And Kate says, wow, Stephanie, I wish I had a book club right now. Maybe I will get back to mine post-pandemic at the Seattle Public Library. So we hope you do. So thank you again, Emily. And
Absolutely.
I'd like to introduce, as you've already met, Stephanie Dray, who is a New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and USA Today bestselling author of historical women's fiction, including the blockbuster hits America's First Daughter and My Dear Hamilton. Her award-winning work has been published and translated into 8 languages and regularly tops lists of the most anticipated reads of the year. Huge fan right here. She lives in Maryland with her husband, cats, and history books, and now some wine, I have a feeling, too. Her historical novel, The Women of Chateau Lafayette, is now out in paperback, and it's an epic saga based on the true story of an extraordinary castle in the heart of France and the remarkable women bound by its legacy. Most castles are protected by men, this one by women. And it is International Women's Month, so it's quite fitting that we have real and fictional women today to celebrate Stephanie Dray and the Women of Chateau Lafayette. Take it away, Stephanie. Welcome.
Well, thank you. I am going to take it away. Let me share my screen because we're going to do a little bit of a slideshow. I have promised some pictures. So, all right. Can everybody see that okay? Okay. So as Susan said, my work has mostly focused on founding mothers of the Revolutionary era. But I should note that my career actually started with novels about Cleopatra's daughter. And I want you to remember that because it's going to be important later. But right now, I'm going to be talking about The Women of Chateau Lafayette, which is based on the true story of an extraordinary castle in the heart of France and the remarkable women that were bound by its legacy. Now, the castle in question, of course, is the Chateau de Chavignac, the birthplace of Lafayette and his ancestral home. The Marquis de Lafayette, who, thanks to an obscure little musical called Hamilton, is better known these days as America's favorite fighting Frenchman. And I am a big fan of the musical and all things American Revolution. But Lafayette has come to take a special place in my heart as one of our least controversial founding fathers. He was really, an idealistic kid who crossed an ocean to fight for this country when he was only 19. Now, Lafayette first appeared in one of my novels when I was writing with my co-author, Dr. Laura Camoy, about Thomas Jefferson's eldest daughter, Patsy. And what I hadn't realized when I began writing America's First Daughter was the way in which Lafayette played that role of lucky talisman in her personal story. Now, Jefferson and Lafayette were friends, so it's not surprising that, you might find portraits of him at Monticello. But the last time I visited Thomas Jefferson's home at Monticello, the historians had a portrait of Lafayette in Patsy's private office over her desk. And the docents explained that that's because she really revered him. When she was a little girl on the run with her father in Virginia, it was Lafayette who helped drive the British away. And when she was a young woman in France, it was Lafayette who gave her entrance to French society. And later in life, when her marriage was falling apart and she was faced with real doubt about the sacrifices that she'd made for our nation, it was Lafayette's visit in 1824 that really lifted her spirits and helped her make some important decisions. Now, what's surprising is that he just kept coming up in my work. When Laura and I moved on to writing My Dear Hamilton about the life of Eliza Schuyler Hamilton, wife of our first Secretary of the Treasury and current Broadway star, we were shocked to find that Lafayette was also a lucky talisman in her life too. He appeared at crucial moments to give aid and comfort with no expectation of any reward but friendship and goodwill. Then, to my shock and maybe a little bit of horror, in my next novel, Ribbons of Scarlet, which is about the women of the French Revolution, Lafayette showed up again. My heroine in that book is Sophie de Grouchy, who was allegedly in love with Lafayette. And her acceptance of the impossibility of that match, along with her marriage to the Marquis de Condorcet, really changed the course of her life and established her as a revolutionary heroine in her own right. So for me, Lafayette is kind of like a Forrest Gump of revolutionary history, who keeps popping up in all of my books and changing the plot line wherever he goes. I sometimes joke that instead of Deus Ex Machina, it should be Deus Ex Lafayette. But what's more interesting to me as a writer of women's fiction is that I have yet to find any revolutionary figure who paid as much attention to the founding mothers of our nation. Lafayette made a point of visiting the widows of his fallen comrades during his farewell tour. He acknowledged their contributions and wanted them at his side during public functions. And women returned the favor because they have played a vital role in defending his legacy, as I show in The Women of Chateau Lafayette. And I just want to point out that this slide actually shows a statue of Lafayette that appears in the book. This is a statue that got taken down during World War II. And I won't tell you what happened to it, but you'll just have to read the book. It plays an important part. All right, now when I started working on The Women of Chateau Lafayette, I was excited to introduce readers to our French founding mother, Lafayette's wife, Adrienne, and her remarkable story of love and courage. But my agent didn't feel as strongly at the time that this was going to be a big project for me. She said, in first place, she's an American. In the second place, she wasn't a queen. And in the third place, she didn't even get her head cut off during the French Revolution. So this book will never sell. She really hoped that I would write something about World War II. And I was really frustrated with this because I had never written in World War II. And I was grumpy, and I went to Panera Bread with my very good friend, Kate Quinn, who you might know from the Alice Network and most recently the Rose Code. And I was complaining to her and saying, well, if only there was some connection between Lafayette and the Nazis, I'd be all set. And she kind of laughed and said, let that percolate in the back of your mind. So I did. And I started researching. And that's when I found something extraordinary. I learned that Lafayette's birthplace, that humble castle hidden deep in the mountains of France, had served as a hiding place for Jewish children during the Holocaust. And it's recounted in the memoirs of one of these children, Giselle Feldman. And I have to admit, this discovery both shocked and moved me. I had to know how this could have possibly happened. Well, it happened because the castle had been purchased and renovated by an American woman during the First World War to serve as an orphanage and a medical facility for displaced and refugee children. And that woman was Beatrice Chandler, an American actress, singer, starlet, and sculptress who went on to become an author and a decorated war heroine. Now, to research this book, in 2017, I wanted to go see the castle where Lafayette was born. So I visited France, where I was warmly welcomed by the modern-day women of Chateau Lafayette, who help run the castle today. And that's me standing under the gate, the iron gate, which appears sometimes in the book. It was really wonderful to see the statue in the square and, to taste a buttery croissant in the little cafe the town's only cafe. This is a very small town. And in the stones I walked on, I felt a real sense of presence of the women who had done so many important things here. So let's talk a little bit about them, particularly Adrian. Lafayette's wife was instrumental in his success and also an accomplice and an apostle of his ideas. With her husband, Adrian joined Brissot's Abolitionist Society in 1789 in her own name. And when Lafayette set out to prove that emancipation was both a moral imperative as well as a workable idea, it was his wife who managed the details of the plantations that he purchased in French Guiana to that end. Now, like her husband, she hoped that the American experiment would be the beginning of a worldwide movement towards democracy and brotherhood. Thus, she worked to make the alliance between France and America strong. And, you know, if you've been watching the news today, you know how important that alliance is. We honor Adrian because Lafayette could not have become a hero of one world, much less two, without her. But what might be the most remarkable thing about Adrian is that she and her husband lit a torch that was carried forward generation after generation at that castle and in that town. Their ideals didn't die with them. They've been renewed in spirit in every generation since, including our own. And in my book, I wanted to write about some of the women who carried that legacy forward. And so you see some of them pictured right here. Long after the wars in which Lafayette fought were over, a new kind of war came to Europe. The First World War resulted in more than 2 million dead and hundreds of thousands of displaced and orphaned children. And though the United States was officially neutral, hundreds of Americans were stranded in the war zone when it began. Thankfully for the world, one of those Americans was Beatrice Chandler. Now, who was Beatrice Chandler? If you had asked her at the start of the war, she would have likely introduced herself as Mrs. William Astor Chandler, wife of the famous millionaire explorer turned politician. But before Beatrice married William Chandler, she had been a Broadway actress, a star in her own right, going by the stage name Minnie Ashley. And in the writing of my novel, I learned many of her secrets, although I'm not going to give them all away today in this presentation. What I will say is that just before her marriage, Beatrice gave up the stage, but she soon felt pretty stifled because, like her husband, Beatrice could not be satisfied with a comfortable life of parties and glamour. She needed to create, so she began a second career as a sculptress, and she was really good at it. Her pieces were accepted as part of national displays, and she carved a 400-foot relief for the Vanderbilt Hotel, of which her husband was part owner. But when the war broke out, Beatrice found herself embroiled in a much bigger project. With her friend Emily, she founded the Lafayette Fund to send aid to French troops, and eventually she purchased the chateau. Ultimately, Lafayette became a talisman for American soldiers, and in 1917, Americans entered the war ultimately to pay tribute at Lafayette's grave with the statement, "Lafayette, we are here." And I still get a little choked up when I think about that. So the castle came into its own as the Lafayette Preventorium, at which fragile children were sent to regain their health. And the women who established it then tried to sort of balance their own philanthropy with, rebuilding their lives after the war. Meanwhile, in those years, the chateau became one of the most advanced medical facilities of its time. And those pictures are from the chateau, where you see children being treated and children swimming and the dining room and various things that we talk about in the book. Unfortunately, the war would come again to Chauvignac. And during the Second World War, the administrators of the Preventorium found themselves in the so-called free zone, navigating a new regime that was outwardly hostile towards what we have come to think of as Lafayette's ideas. And what I learned was that Chavignac, Lafayette's birthplace, actually became a hotbed of French resistance. One French resistance fighter testified that almost the entire village was pledged to the cause and that 60 villagers fought alongside him. And again, understand how small this village is. So that's pretty much everybody. But the mayor, I think is what he said, everybody but the mayor. So in apparent defiance of Nazi occupation, the chateau itself issued a pamphlet in English saying that they would not discriminate on the basis of religion. And in light of all of this, I was excited to show how the work of Adrienne and Beatrice culminated in heroism at Chavignac. So imagine my surprise to discover that the most modern period at the castle was the one about which the least is actually discoverable. Though there was communications between the Free Zone and America, they were possible before 1942. My research uncovered complaints from the chateau's American benefactors that they weren't even sure the Preventorium was operating. And Giselle Feldman and her brother were hidden and protected at the chateau, but she recounts that an additional 15 Jewish children were brought to the Preventorium, betrayed by a supervisor, and escaped high into the mountains with the help of staff and resistance fighters. Unfortunately, this recollection does not name the people involved in orchestrating the escape. So now I had a problem because I had to be super careful about which heroine I was going to choose for this time period, since I didn't know the names of the people who did these amazing things. Then I noticed this picture. In the 1918 yearbook for the Lafayette Preventorium, Bishop in Amiens refers to the plight of thousands of so-called children of the frontier, orphans and refugees, many of whom had unknown origins and were saved by the women of Chateau Lafayette. And this picture, I see a child with flaxen braids, a lone girl sitting in a classroom of boys, staring straight at the camera with challenge in her eyes, as if demanding to be noticed. And thus, Martha Simone was born, because I thought, aha, there you are. That is my heroine. Now, it was really challenging to get into the minds of 3 different women during 3 different wars. But the most amazing and shocking bits of the story are all true. There are secret tunnels and false identities, wartime love affairs, cloak and dagger resistance, stolen statues, hidden relics, and more. And it was a story that really reminded me that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary acts in difficult times, and that we must learn from the women who came before us. Now, writing this novel convinced me that history always shapes the present, and that what we do today, those ideas that we choose to celebrate, they will shape the future. In short, I fell in love with the women of Chateau Lafayette, and I hope you will too.
Thank you, Stephanie. Wow, fascinating. So I want to open it up to questions. You can either type your questions in the Q&A button on the lower portion of your screen in the toolbar, or you can type them in the chat box. I'm just looking at comments now. Yes. All right. So questions, anybody for Stephanie about the book? And I'll start it off while we're waiting for anybody to type their questions in. But, you know, so many books now are written in a dual timeline narrative, but you chose a triple, which has got to be incredibly complicated. And so I know you had 3 heroines you wanted to feature, but how did you decide to make it 3 and take on that challenge?
Let me tell you, it was a very daunting task. I had never even done a dual narrative, much less a triple narrative before. I didn't know what I was doing. And many, many times in the writing of this book, I thought maybe I need to divide the story maybe this needs to be a trilogy, or maybe it's just Adrienne and Beatrice's story, or maybe it's just Beatrice and Marta's story, or I kept trying to pull it apart. And every time I did that, I really felt sick over it, because I felt like the message of the book was not the life story of any of these one women. It was the passing of the torch from one woman to the next, and how we keep faith with our ancestors and with our descendants. So I really did want to write about the legacy of the castle, which meant I had to wrestle these chapters into some kind of coherent order. And they were reordered so many times that I'm not sure I could tell you what the final order of them is. My editor printed out the chapters, laid them out on her floor, and kept swapping them around. And we tried every configuration. Sometimes we ended up starting with Marta because we felt that she was the youngest of she was the most modern of the heroines, and that she might be the most familiar to the reader, and her situation might be more compelling. Also, I knew that it was going to take a little time to get Martha started, because she has a long character arc where, you know, she's a frog boiling for a while. She can't do anything. She feels trapped. It's a long time before that heroism boils to the top, and she decides, I can't live like this. I have to do something. The other issue, you know, I really thought, well, I'd like to have all three of the heroines in that opening prologue. So originally I had Beatrice actually at the castle, but it sort of meant that Martha could ask her questions there, and I didn't want her to be able to have that contact. I wanted her to be confused about her heritage and about Beatrice's place in her life, and so on and so forth. So a lot of decisions got made about how to order and structure this story. And I'm sure that every single one of my artist and author friends was desperately grateful when this project was over, because I tormented them all, you know, asking their opinions and trying to make it work out. And I'm just so honored that readers seem to have loved the end result.
Absolutely. And I'm just curious logistically how you did that. Did you have everything on your computer? Did you have it like your editor was spread out all over your desk or your floor? Or how did you logistically manage that?
I use a tool called Scrivener, and it basically allows me to digitally move things around, like their cork, index cards on a cork board, and I can move the chapters around that way. And I honestly don't know how writers write without it. Once I got this tool and I figured it out and it started working for me, I feel totally hobbled when I try to use Microsoft Word or something else. So I'm a big fan of technology, except for tonight, and because we had our difficulties. But I'm a big fan of using technology to enhance the art, but I'm not old school like my editor printing things out. Maybe I should be. Maybe it would be better if I printed it out. I don't know.
I don't know. It'd be quite a challenge to manage, because how many pages does this baby have?
Right? It's a big book, but I will say that, you know, once you're past the first third, then I knew, you know, basically what order they were in. And let me talk a little bit more about that in terms of choosing how to write them and interweave them. So a lot of authors, and I think Kate Quinn does this, she'll write all the timelines at the same time. I feared doing that because I thought I'm going to get 17th or 18th century dialogue mixed up with World War II slang. And I wanted to keep the voices very distinct. So I wrote each story separately, and then I had to put them together. But the trick about that is you need to have each of the three stories hit the same emotional points around the same time. You can't have, you know, somebody suffering doom and gloom and torture and death, and then flip to the next chapter and Adrian is having a party and sipping champagne at Versailles, even if it's the best champagne. So, so I had to kind of make sure that the stories matched each other a little bit and weave them together and make sure the transition flowed. And I did have some debates with my editor about transitions. She didn't think that we particularly needed them in some places, but some of them I was just in love with and I wouldn't let them go. Like there's a chapter transition between Lafayette talking about the real Christmas tradition that they have in Auvergne, where they have the brioche candle bread, and they each take a turn lighting it. And he talks about how each person blows it out and hands it to the next youngest person. And then Martha, of course, has the same tradition 100, 200 years later. So that I really wanted to keep that because I thought it was such a thematic transition. So maybe we didn't need it, but I was not losing it. I was going to keep it.
Well, Emily said, I think you did a great job putting all those chapters together. And every time a chapter ends, I'm ready to keep jumping into the next.
Hey, that's wonderful.
Yeah, and she also said, I love the brioche transition. It felt authentic and it wasn't lost on me. I know that Kate said, Stephanie, I love this book and my dear Hamilton, which brings up Debbie's question, which said, I understand you are working on another collaboration with Laura Camoy. Can you talk about that at all?
I sure can. So like it must have been a decade ago that Laura and I first were sitting at a writers' conference together talking about Thomas Jefferson. And she was a professor at the time at the Naval Academy teaching American history. And I was still writing about Cleopatra's daughter in the ancient world. Oops, I forgot how to connect that up. This is great. I get to remember, I told you to remember that I had started out my career writing about Cleopatra's daughter. Well, the connection for this is that when I found out that Beatrice Chandler was the woman who bought Chateau Lafayette, I was so puzzled because I thought, I know that name. Where do I know that name? And I looked over my desk on a bookshelf and I saw there was a book by Beatrice Chandler. And the book was Cleopatra's Daughter. It was the biography on which I based my first novel. So Beatrice started my career and I got so excited. I shrieked and my husband came running down the stairs to find out what was wrong with me. I just couldn't fathom it. It was the same woman. And it almost felt like she was my writing spirit guru sitting on my desk, waiting for me to discover that she also had a story to tell. So there are these moments in your writing career where you have serendipity, and that one with Beatrice is one of them. And then there is my collaboration with Laura Camoy, because here we were sitting at this writing conference talking about her classes on Thomas Jefferson. And I was telling her I'd always wanted to write a book about Thomas Jefferson, but everything that had ever been written, there was just so much written about him already. How could anyone make a unique contribution? And besides, I was still writing in the ancient world. What did I know about American history? So we decided that we could collaborate together. And we raced back to my hotel room and started researching Jefferson's daughter, because we know a lot about Thomas Jefferson as a founding father, but nothing about him as an actual father. We were up until like 3 a.m, maybe later. And in our delirium, we decided then and there that we were going to write America's First Daughter and that we were going to write it together, which is a huge amount of hubris because we had never collaborated with anybody before. It could have been an unholy disaster. These are the things that ruin friendships. In our case, though, it made it stronger. And we wrote America's First Daughter, and we had so much fun that we then wrote My Dear Hamilton. And, we've been writing separate solo books for the past couple of years, and we really miss it. We miss the dynamic energy that you get from collaborating. So we were talking about what our next project would be, and we're really excited about the book that we just sold, which is going to be about Abigail Adams and her daughter, Nabby. It's going to be called A Founding Mother. And I'm excited about it because even though you've probably seen there's a wonderful HBO special on John Adams, we can't match that. We wouldn't even try. But nobody talks about the mother-daughter relationships in the Revolution. These were women who had to sustain themselves and each other while the founding fathers were off doing their crazy stunts. John Adams was away from home a lot. So who did Abigail lean on? She leaned on her daughter, who was also an amazing woman. So I am excited to, really tell a narrowly tailored story about this relationship at the founding. And I hope it will be inspiring. And I know it's going to make everybody cry. So, so can't wait to get started because that's what we need, more tears.
Well, I, for one, am excited about that, first of all, because I'm huge fans of both of yours, but also Abigail Adams has a fondness in my heart because when I was in first grade, my first trip to the school library, we were set loose to pick a book that appealed to us. And I decided I wanted to read all the books about first ladies. And the first book I picked up was a biography, a first grade level biography of Abigail Adams. And ever since then, I just have loved her because so I can't wait for your book. Now I can read an adult version of it.
Yes.
Sally wants to know, I would love to hear more about Stephanie's research and how long did it take to research and write this book?
Oh, okay. So the Women of Chateau Lafayette actually took about 7 years. Now, what I want to stress here is that I wasn't only working on this book the whole 7 years. I was working on My Dear Hamilton and America's First Daughter. I had the idea very early because we just fell in love with Lafayette. But it evolved over time. And so I was doing a lot of research. I would say probably 2.5 years of serious research went into it before it became a real proposal. And then it took me a while to write it because the story kept changing under my feet. This was a very strange book in which I knew a lot about Adrienne Lafayette. There were biographies about her. There are still extant letters. It's usually more difficult to find out the truth about figures who are farther back in history. This was the reverse. I knew about Adrienne. I thought I knew about Beatrice. And I had a very hard time nailing down my heroine for World War II. I initially thought it was going to be Anne de la Grange, because I thought what a lovely mother and daughter story this could be, with Emily Sloan in World War I and her daughter taking over her work in World War II. But then when I read about these Jewish children, some of them being betrayed by an unnamed supervisor in the chateau, I really had to wonder, do I think it was Anne who would have turned them in? I don't. In my heart of hearts, I believe Anne and her mother were both dedicated to the chateau and would never have done something like that. But I could not ignore sort of the anti-Semitic history of the Baron. And I couldn't ignore the sort of strange behavior of the guides and the villagers when I was actually in Chavignac and asking about this family. I would get incomplete answers. And in fact, at one point, it seemed like the guide didn't know who I was even talking about when I asked about the Baron. And maybe it was a language barrier, but I thought it was odd because there was a plaque dedicated to the Baron right outside the church. It's the only one on that wall. And again, super tiny town. So literally impossible that you would not know who he was. So I started wondering if this is one of those situations where it's a complicated situation in France, who was a collaborator, who was a resistor, and they didn't really want to get into it. And I thought, this is not something I want to get wrong. So I made this compilation character of Marta. Then after I thought the book was done, I went to the New York Historical Society and I discovered a packet of letters, and they were love letters between Beatrice and what turned out to be a French officer who is not her husband. This was not the story I had anticipated. I did not know about this affair. And suddenly, and also I had to reveal this to the family because I was working with Beatrice's grandson who allowed me access to her letters. So that was kind of a, not exactly fun thing to tell the family. Oh, hey, your grandma was having an affair. But that made me think I have to rethink about this story and reshape it. So I rewrote it. And this time, it was no longer a story about a marriage's survival, but really a story about a marriage falling apart and an affair, and a sort of a doomed love story. Then, now I have written this book twice. Then I got a phone call from Beatrice's grandson who told me, when you went to the New York Historical Society, you found a lot of papers, and you didn't know what all of them meant. And you sent one of them to me that looked like a family tree. And you said you didn't recognize any of the names on it, but I did. And so he went down this sort of rabbit hole of research, and he came out with a giant rabbit. And he said, my grandmother was lying about her identity her entire life. And he was actually very upset about it. And I won't, spoil what she was lying about. But when I found out, I thought, this is an even more remarkable woman than I would have ever guessed. And I must rewrite the book now to reflect who she really was. That meant going back to my editors and asking for a very long extension. But thankfully, they understood that I was trying to do make a real contribution to the historical scholarship about this woman. So they allowed me to do it. And so it took a lot longer than I might normally take for this book, but I think the end result was worth it.
Yeah, and I think you're definitely going to need a glass of that 2017 Chateau Lafayette Merlot to get through that section and that whole story for sure. Stephanie made a comment. I loved the book and your presentation. What was the most difficult topic in terms of your research process for this book, which you may have just addressed? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit. That was the hardest. I think it was really interesting to me to see how people could change their identities and their names. Beatrice often lied about her background on her passport forms. I was very amused. I found one passport application that she wrote where she did not want to fill out the personal information on it. So she wrote, "See who's who," and somehow got away with this. Like, you go try that with a passport agent now, see if you get your passport. But she did. And so it was really difficult to track the actual identities of people. And one of the people that was hardest to identify was Clara Simon. She was a Jewish woman who volunteered at the chateau, and I knew that she had been fired in World War II by the Baron. We have his letter where he sort of justifies his action, and it doesn't make him look very good. But I spent some time thinking, oh my God, what happened to her? Did she get caught by the Nazis? Did she die? And I remember spending, I would say, 2 days in Ancestry.com searching through the records of people who died in the Holocaust, looking for her name, and just getting, angrier and angrier and angrier every record I went through. And ultimately, I found out that she did survive. She and her family escaped the horror. But my mood was dark. And a lot of times in the researching of World War II, I felt emotional in a way that no other time period has made me feel, which is strange on one hand, because every time period that I have written about has some kind of horror, some sort of massacre, something terrible. But the sheer spite and hatred of World War II, the sort of systematic hatred of it, was very hard to bear, and it made it difficult to get the research done. So I don't know if that's exactly a topic, but that was a real challenge in writing World War II fiction.
Yeah, absolutely. And Debbie asked, when you say you rewrote the book 3 times, did you actually literally rewrite the entire thing 3 times? Or what do you mean by rewrite?
Well, I didn't have to rewrite Adrian and Martha's sections, but because they're all interwoven, I did have to now reorder everything and sometimes add new scenes or take away scenes from each part of the book, even if it was Adrian's section or Martha's section, because it now had to fit with Beatrice's chapter. So I kind of did have to rewrite the book 3 times, even though it didn't mean that every word had to get rewritten.
Yeah. Okay. And Kate wants to know, she says, I think your new project is great. I love hearing stories about what we don't know, especially about women.
Yes, it's very important for us to see ourselves in history because we were there all the time, fighting right alongside the men in these difficult circumstances.
Yeah, and I think that's it for our audience questions. And I'll close with one last question. I don't know if you know anything about it, because I know a lot of times authors don't have input into their covers, but I mean, I have an advanced copy, but this is the cover for the hardcover, and you have the cover for the paperback, which is different.
I do. Do you want to see it?
Yes.
Okay, here we go.
It's a beauty. And I'm just wondering, do you know, can you explain, or any conversations you had with your publisher about why that changed, and any input into that?
Yeah, the feedback that I originally got is that dark covers work really well on hardcover, but not so well in paperback. People, I guess in paperback, they want a lighter, brighter cover, and which this is, because it's very sunny. That's a sunspot there. And since the original cover was a little bit time period ambiguous, they really wanted to pick a time period this time, and I had 3 to pick from. And we ultimately decided on the World War II book because they had this lovely composition where we see the planes, and that's actually the castle in the background, and that's Marta looking in the sky, no doubt really angry about those planes flying over her castle. And it was a little, I just thought it was really beautiful, and fits in well with what is selling today.
Sounds good. And somebody asked about when they can expect their copy of the book. They are being shipped as soon as we possibly can. So coming soon. And it's been a joy talking to both of you. Before final thoughts with you, I just wanted to mention, you mentioned Kate Quinn a couple of times. Kate Quinn is going to be one of the stars of our upcoming Rancho La Puerta Spa Week in Tecate, Mexico, which is 90 minutes south of San Diego. We're spending a week at the spa with New York Times bestselling authors Jane Green and Kate Quinn. It's going to be a remarkable week. You can visit our website, adventuresbythebook.com, to learn more. We also are just working now, and I wanted to mention it because it's really a difficult time in our world right now, and we're thinking of the people of Ukraine and what they are going through. And we are going to be putting together a multi-author Ukrainian fundraising event here in San Diego. For those of you who are in San Diego, a lot of authors are going to be participating. It's going to be a remarkable and very moving event, and a fundraising event as well for the people of Ukraine. So for those of you who have not yet purchased a copy of The Women of Chateau Lafayette, you can still visit our website, adventuresbythebook.com. Get your copy. It will include signed book plates as well. You can go to Chateau Lafayette. The link is in the chat box, where you can order your 3-pack of wine, and you can sip your Chardonnay as you're reading the sections about Adrian. You can sip your Pinot Noir when you're reading the sections about Martha, and you can sip your, all right, finding my notes here, 2017 Merlot, to be talking about Beatrice. And it sounds like you're really going to need that with Beatrice, with all this, the juicy stuff you're going to find out about her. So I want to thank Emily from Chateau Lafayette Reneau for your presentation today. And I hope you do order the wine from them. I think it's going to be really fun to do a wine and book sipping experience. In fact, we came up with this Reading Between the Vines series before COVID. And then, of course, those events, in-person events, were put on hold. But when this opportunity came along, we said, well, we'll launch it virtually. And when the world opens up again, we're on the West Coast. So we have been talking to some folks in Napa and Sonoma about doing in-person wine and book pairings up there. So stay tuned for those. And Stephanie, congratulations on the paperback release of Women of Chateau Lafayette. I hope you get your copy. We can't wait for more news from you. Thank you both. And thank you to our adventurers for coming. You guys are great, always supporting our authors and purchasing books. And we will see you next time on our Adventures by the Book. Thank you, everyone.